the most important thing is persistence. And that comes, and a few things come into that. I think it's really important to change the way you think about failure and risk. So for example, in the case of failure, I think it's really important to think about failure as a learning experience and not something absolutely horrible, and like have this idea of failing forward. Like, Facebook's mission, like kind of internal mission statement used to at least be move fast and break things. It's kind of adopting that kind of philosophy, because that way you really learn and improve in the quickest way.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as a founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on our podcast, Karl Swanepoel. And Karl grew up always knowing he wanted to start a business. So after high school, went off to university in Wales, not Yale, but Wales, and got degrees in AI and robotics, and then graduated and started a business. Started, I think, during the last year of the school, and then continued to do that. Has raised pre-seed round and has continued to grow since then. And with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Karl.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Devin.
Hey, excited to have you here. So I just gave a much more condensed version to a longer journey. So why don't we rewind and unpack a little bit and tell us a little bit about how your journey got started, kind of growing up, knowing you wanted to go into business.
Sure. Well, when I was 13, I decided that I wanted to be my own boss, and that, that's just what I wanted to do. And basically ever since then, I have never changed my mind. So even back then, I kind of started by trying to figure out how to make money online, because I was trying to find ways of actually making this happen, knowing that it's no, easy feat to pull off. So I started by freelancing, then quite quickly realized that the existing freelancing platforms just really weren't working right for freelancers. So I built my own, which I was forced to sell right before my 16th birthday, because PayPal doesn't allow under 18-year-olds to have a PayPal account. I've been involved in a few different sort of businesses and startups since then. But then, as you mentioned, in my final year of university,
now,
being
just
older than 18.
Rewind just a little bit.
Sure.
13 years old it's fairly young to decide, hey, from this point on, I want to be in business, right? And great. And I think I'm by all means an advocate of it. But at 13 years old, how did you figure out, hey, I want to own my own business, or I want to run it? Was it you watch movies, TV shows, family, read a book, had a dream? Kind of what put you in that direction of, from a fairly young age wanting to head in that direction?
It's a good question, and honestly, I don't really know. The answer is none of the above. My family, for example, don't do anything remotely related to business or entrepreneurship. They're in academics, so I don't really know. It just kind of came to me. I just thought that I didn't want to work for someone else. I wanted to work for myself, and was very stubborn with that. So that's what I have always felt, and all the experiences that I picked up along the way just kind of reinforced that this really is the right kind of route for me.
No, makes sense. And, and I'm probably a little bit the same way. I love law, but I also love startups and small businesses. And if you're to ask me, I think there were things around the way that were impactful or kind of reinforced it. But what causes that natural drive, I think, is just, sometimes it's just inherently you find that interesting, or find it is what you enjoy. So you went off to school and you studied AI as well as robotics. And so, if your intent is to do a business or start up and kind of go in that direction, how did the degree slot into that, or how did the degree slot into that?
Sure. Well, I knew I wanted to start a technology business. So I thought, I wanted to go to university. So, I kind of thought either I study business and teach myself the tech side, or vice versa. But then I decided that I would rather study, because I'd already kind of been teaching myself and experimenting with the business side for quite a few years at that time. I thought it would be better to get kind of a formal education and background in the tech side, and then, pick up a useful skill or two that I can apply to a business that I start.
No, makes sense. So now as you were going through the degree, I think you're on your last year of college and you kind of started down the road of building a business while you're wrapping up the degree. But walk us through a little bit. How did you come up with the idea? How did you get it started? What was the idea, and kind of what was that process to do that as you're finishing up school?
Sure. Well, first of all, I was older than 18 at that point, so I could actually have a PayPal account. So that's good. Essentially, I was looking at the shifts in remote working during the pandemic. We were still in a lockdown at the time. And I noticed, that like video calling, for example, now is such an essential part of remote work, whereas before the pandemic, it wasn't so like widely adopted and accepted. But then I realized that, these existing platforms still hadn't changed. They still don't allow video calling, for example. And I just thought that, now was really the time for innovation in the space. So I thought, being older than 18, being allowed to have a PayPal account, I thought I'd give it a shot. And that was roughly 2.5 years ago, just under. And been building it ever since.
So now one question I would, maybe point out or ask on is, remote working is increased with the pandemic. It was around before, it'll be around after in different forms and fashions and depending on it. So how did you figure out, and so it's a reasonably crowded marketplace. You have, I know Philippines is a big one. You have India is another large place with a lot of remote workers and VAs. And then you also have across the US, and depending on kind of your needs. But how did you figure out, or what was kind of the areas that, hey, I can make a difference or impact, or is it just simply, hey, I think there's room enough for me too, or kind of how did you go about kind of tackling an industry that was, I'd say reasonably established?
Yeah, so there are a few large freelancing platforms, but they all operate in a very similar way. So they all charge a very large commission fee on every piece of work delivered, which can be up to a quarter of the work. And in order to enforce that, because that is a fairly big chunk, they ban you from emailing or video calling or communicating off platform in any way, shape, or form. So they disrupt your workflow and take a huge bite out of your earnings. So basically, my approach was, well, why don't we just not charge a commission fee, and then we don't have to, ban and restrict people's communication.
So now you do that with the, with the intent, okay, a little, I would say, a good way to tackle it, if there's a sensitivity to, we're getting take a large chunk of what we're making is going towards a platform, then if we can find a way that we can, as a remote workers can keep a larger portion of that in their pocket, definitely makes sense. Now, as you got into that, as you launched, as you started, did it take off and you had money rain down from the skies and you had more money than you knew what to do with? Was it always teetering on the verge of bankruptcy? Was it a slow growth? Kind of walk us through as you got that up and going as you're wrapping up college and then graduating, how that the business has progressed so far.
Yeah, sure. And before I do, what I'll just touch on as well is actually, in my opinion, this market is not very saturated at all. I mean, if you look at the big players, it's very easy, definitely, to come to that conclusion. But keep in mind that Fiverr has about 4 million users, Upwork has about 16 million, and Freelancer.com has about 60 million. But there are 1.56 billion freelancers in the world. McKinsey predicts that by 2027, more than half of the US workforce will be freelancers. So that's a real big shift going in that direction. And Fiverr themselves actually did a little study recently, which found that 71% of Gen Z want to go into freelancing as opposed to sort of a traditional 9-to-5 job. So I think there's a lot more to be done in this space. And as for how it's kind of been going so far, I'd say it's been going pretty good. I mean, for the first few months, of course, we were building the platform when we first launched it. It was kind of going slow. I think we started with like 100 users. Took us a little while to get from 100 to 200. But then when we really started figuring out how to effectively market the platform, we started growing a lot faster. And we've got well over 20,000 users on the platform today, with a kind of accelerating growth. So yeah, I'd say all in all, we've been pretty fortunate and, on our way to making a difference in the space.
Oh, that's awesome. It's great to, get some traction, or start to build out the user base and be able to address, kind of some needs in the marketplace to offer a better way for people to or do remote working, is that's where a lot of people are shifting. So now, as you kind of
I can't hear you, unfortunately.
That is a fair question. Hold on. Can you hear me now? Well, hold on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So for the listening audience, we had a slight amount of technical glitch, and we just tend to leave it in. Shows the natural nature of the conversation. But what I was saying is, so now if you were to take, looking at to kind of where you guys are at today, but then or looking a bit into the future of where things are headed, take the next 6 to 12 months, kind of where do you see the business headed, and what are the next steps for you guys?
Sure. I mean, well, my long-term goal is to permanently change the freelancing space for the better. I think we are definitely on our way to doing that. But even in 6 months' time, I think we'll be serving a significantly larger community. Our platform is going to have a lot more features that people are, actively asking for. We'll have a bigger team. We'll have secured more funding. So I think in 6 months we'll be in a really positive place.
No, that's awesome. So in other words, the short answer to that is we're going to continue to work hard, grow, and continue to expand in the marketplace and carve out a place for us, and which I think definitely makes sense and is a good direction to head in. So, well, now as we've kind of reached the present day of your journey and even looking a bit into the future, always a great time to transition to the two questions I always ask at the end of each episode. So we'll jump to those now. So the first question I always like to ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? What'd you learn from it?
Good question. I'd say worst business decision was probably when I was 18. I started a small web and marketing agency in my local town. That wasn't the worst decision, but alongside that, within just a couple of months, I decided that I wanted to get this really fancy office on the local high street, and we could just about afford it with the revenue that was coming in. But essentially, what it was a complete vanity metric. We weren't really meeting clients there very much. It was, I could have just as well run it from home for a bit longer and given it, reinvested the money so it grew a bit more. So yeah, it was a complete vanity metric. It meant that we were pretty much at a break-even point, whereas otherwise we could have actually been generating something on top of that. So I'd say that was probably my, one of my worst business decisions, definitely. But it did actually lead to meeting one of our advisors who built a multi-billion-dollar public company, who's still an advisor today. And if I hadn't had done that, I wouldn't have attracted the attention of the small local newspaper, which means that this, advisor of mine now wouldn't have read about it and reached out to me. So that connection would have never been made had it not been for that office. So I think it definitely worked out, but at its core, it was definitely a very stupid decision.
And sometimes it's hard to balance those vanity metrics. And I've seen it with other businesses where, hey, one, it makes you feel like you're successful. And sometimes you can tell yourself, well, we need to represent to the world that we're successful, or that the business is doing well. And so they'll feel more comfortable to investing. And, so I think it's one of those, and sometimes it's just nice to have nice things around you. And, you don't blame anybody for wanting to have nice things. But I think it's one of those where it's certainly easy early on in the business to justify some of that. But it's one where, can be impactful to business and stop you from growing as quickly or investing in the other areas that may be more impactful. So definitely an easy mistake to learn or to make, but a great one to learn from. Second question now that I like to ask is, so now if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
It's a good question. If I had to boil it down to one thing, I'd say that the most important thing is persistence, and that comes, and a few things come into that. I think it's really important to change the way you think about failure and risk. So, for example, in the case of failure, I think it's really important to think about failure as a learning experience and not something absolutely horrible, and like have this idea of failing forward. Like, Facebook's mission, like kind of internal mission statement used to at least be move fast and break things. It's kind of adopting that kind of philosophy, because that way you really learn and improve in the quickest way. Then when it comes to risk, obviously, just thinking about things rationally, like, okay, you try and start a business, maybe it doesn't work out. What's really the worst thing that's going to happen? If you just kind of start small, try and build it up, it doesn't work out, you're probably going to be just fine, So it's really, it's about framing things in a certain way where you're more likely to take and calculated, risks that can really pay off in your favor. And if it doesn't work out, it's not really that big of a deal, and then you can learn from the failure, and then try again and have a much, much better approach. But one final thought on that too. There's a great book called Power by Dr. Jeffrey Pfeffer, who is a professor of organizational behavior at the University of Stanford. And in this book, he outlines the top 7 traits of successful people, and that kind of determines success. And intelligence is not on the list at all. And the number 1 trait that he highlighted is grit. So, grit, persistence, that is the most important thing.
No, and I think that, I like you hit on a few great things there. And, one of the ones that I tend to like is, when you're looking at starting a startup or a small business, I love it when you do it in college, or even high school, or at a younger age, because, it gives you the ability to go out, experiment, figure things out, make those mistakes. And yet you're at a place in life where you make those mistakes, it's not going to be the end of the world. In other words, when you have a house, a kids, family, and you have a lot more life responsibilities, you tend to be a lot more cautious, and probably rightly so, because your, missteps can be much more impactful. Whereas earlier on in your life, you go and you start a business and it doesn't take off in college, you're still getting your degree, you're still able to come out and graduate and get a job. And a lot of times it looks great on a resume anyway. And so I think that, taking those first initial steps, but even later on in life, it doesn't mean you have to abandon all of your work and you have to, dive all in. But even just taking some of those steps of, hey, I'm going to try this side hustle, I'm going to do this freelancing work, I'm going to try and build out some clientele or pursue something on the side, and then I'll transition over to it if or as it works out, I think is a great way to approach it. So, well, now as we wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Sure. Well, if you're interested in reaching out to me, if you Google my name, Karl Swanepoel, you'll find my website and also my LinkedIn profile. That's probably the best place to reach out to me directly. And if you are interested in checking out the Revolancer platform, then just Google Revolancer or go to revolancer.com, and you'll be able to get started.
Awesome. Well, I do definitely encourage people to reach out, support a great business. If you're looking to get or to do some freelancing work, definitely a great platform to check out. And if nothing else, you can make a new best friend. So with that, thank you again for coming on the podcast, Karl, and wish you and with that, now if you, for those that are listeners are out there, if you want to have be a guest on the podcast and have your own journey to share, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners, make sure to click share, subscribe, leave us a review, helps us to reach even more startups and small businesses to help them along their journey to success. And on that note, if you ever need help along your journey with patents, trademarks, or anything else to your startup, your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we are always here to help. Well, thank you again, Karl, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you very much.